Hey folks, today we are taking a look at Star Realms from White Wizard Games. Now this was a Kickstarter game that I backed, and I'm going to preface this by saying that I backed it at a level just to get the two-player version of the game, although you can combine two-player sets in order to play up to 6 players in the game. But I have not played it that way. I don't have enough cards to play it that way. I would imagine that the game plays just the same, but the game gets a much more lengthy, much like with Ascension does with more players. But just so you know, this review is for just the 2-player version of the game, not the 3, 4, 5, or 6-player version. I can't comment on that. But anyways, what is the game? The game is a deck building game. This is one with a spacefaring theme. You are purchasing cards that represent different alien civilizations and factions, like the Machine Cultists and the Blob. And they all have different faction markers on the cards indicating this. It's a standard deck builder in a lot of ways. You're using some cards from your starting deck in order to purchase cards and put them into your deck. And much like with Ascension and other games of that ilk, there's a second type of currency, which is actually combat. But unlike in Ascension, you're not using your combat to take out random monsters coming from the center line. You're actually using your combat to attack the other player and their bases. And each player starts off with a certain amount of authority, which is basically like life points, and you're trying to whittle down and destroy your opponent's authority. Then you win the game. So it definitely has more interaction than other deck builders, which is a common complaint of deck building games and the entire genre as a whole, in fact. So does that make it a good game? Let's do the overview, then we'll come back. I'll let you know what I think. Star Realms is a competitive deck building game for 2 players. You can play with up to 6 players if you have multiple sets of the game, but this overview is for a 2-player game. The goal is to knock out your opponent by destroying all of his authority. Each player starts with 50 authority points, which are indicated by these cards here, which have they're double-sided, so you have a 10, you have a 20, and you have a 5 and a 1. So each player will take 50 of those. If you can whittle down all 50 from your opponent, you will win the game immediately. Now, most of the game is standard deck building. If you're not familiar with a deck building game, I'll give you a brief overview. Each player is going to start with the same deck of 10 cards. You have 2 Vipers, and you have 8 Scouts. Each of these represents different currency you can have during the game. So a Viper represents combat. If you have on your turn, you'll play as many cards as you want or as you can, and for every combat that you have, you can deal a point of damage. You can deal it either directly to your opponent if they don't have any outposts in play, and I'll get to that in a minute. And for each point that you deal, they're going to lose one of their authority points. You can also attack the bases that they have in play as well if you want to destroy them. And sometimes, like I said, if they have an outpost base, you won't have a choice. You'll have to go through that first. Scouts, however, give you this trade, which essentially is gold coins or money. For every trade that you have, you can accumulate it during the course of the turn and then buy cards out here from the center row. At the start of the game, the first player is only going to get to draw 3 cards from their 10-card deck. The other player gets to draw 5 cards. For the rest of the game, each player will draw 5 cards from their deck at the end of their turn. Now, in a deck building game, how it works is that whenever you buy a card from the center row, you're going to put that card into your discard pile. Excuse me. And then, whenever you run out of cards from your deck, you'll immediately reshuffle, draw the rest of any cards if you need to, and now you have the opportunity to potentially draw some of the new, better cards that you drew. And eventually, you're going to want to get rid of your weaker starting cards if you can. Now, Explorers are a type of card that are always available for purchase until they run out. Up in the corner of all of these cards, you're going to have the gold symbol here, which is the cost to buy that card. So in this case, in the beginning of the game, you have to play 2 Scouts in order to buy this card. But once you have the Explorer in your deck, if you choose to play it on later turns, it can actually give you 2 trades. So it's actually better than your original Scouts. Now, many cards are going to have this trash can symbol with another type of ability down here. What this means is that when you play this card, you can always get the top portion of the card, but you then have the option of permanently destroying this card and removing it from your deck by putting it off into this, it's actually called the scrap pile, I believe. And then you get that bonus as a one-time thing. But then again, the card is permanently out of your deck. So you have to decide selectively when to do that ability. Now, the other 5 cards that are out here are randomly drawn off the top of the center deck, and every time one of these cards is purchased or discarded for whatever reason, it's going to be immediately replaced from that deck. So you'll always have 5 available cards to purchase. Now, there's two different types of cards, and I'll go through them here. There's bases and there's ships. Those are the two main types of cards that you're going to be buying, and each of the bases and ships belongs to a different faction. You have cards from the Red Gear faction, which I believe is called the Machine Cult. So you have a supply bot here that costs you 3. It gives you 2 currency when you play it, and you can scrap a card in your hand or discard pile. That can be a good thing if you're trying to get rid of your weaker cards to make your deck more efficient. Now you notice that some of these cards down at the bottom, instead of the trash symbol, or sometimes in addition to a trash symbol, have a symbol of the different faction that it belongs to with another special ability. You only get that special ability if you have already played a card of the same faction during that specific turn, or if you have a base in play already with that same symbol faction. Once you have that faction affinity going on, you can use all the different abilities of the card, and you'll actually get both abilities down here. Some other examples. Here's a freighter from, I think it's the Trade Federation. It costs you 4, but you get 4 every time you play it. And if you have faction affinity for a card that you already played or a base that you have in play, you can put the next ship you acquire this turn on top of your deck, so you're more likely to be able to buy it or to have it in your hand quickly. The Star Empire faction, the Imperial Frigate, costs you 3, and you get 4 combat. And you target opponent discards a card, and then if you have faction affinity, you get another 2 combat on top of the 4 that you've got, and you can choose to trash this card permanently or scrap it to draw a card. Then you have the other faction, which is the Blob faction. A trade pod costs you 2, gives you 3 currency. If you have faction affinity, you get another 2 combat power. Those represent ships, and there's all kinds of different ones that I didn't show you, including some out here in the center row. But there's also bases, and those also come in factions as well. When you play a base, normally when you play like ship cards, they're going to go into your discard pile at the end of the turn. If you play a base, it stays out in play, and it has 1 more stat on its card. Up here you have the faction symbol, you have the name, the cost of the card when you buy it, and down here in the lower right corner is the base's defense. If someone chooses to use their combat power to attack this base, they have to meet or beat that number. If they do, they destroy it, but not permanently. It goes into your discard pile. So in that sense, there's a difference between destroy and scrap. Scrap is gone permanently, destroy just goes into your discard pile. So long as this is out, however, you'll be able to use a special ability. In this case, if you played a base this turn, including this one, you draw a card. So as soon as you play this base, you get to draw a card. If it's still in play when you play other cards, or when you play other bases, excuse me, you'll get to draw more cards. Here's an example of a blob base. Costs you 3. It'll always give you 1 combat on your turn, once per turn. You can only use these abilities once per turn. It's got 5 defense, and you can choose to scrap this base to get an additional 3 currency. Here we have the Barter World from the Trade Federation. It costs you 4. You may choose in your turn once to either get 2 extra authority points, basically life points, which is good, or you can choose to get 2 currency. It's got 4 defense, and you can scrap it to get 5 combat for 1 time only. And Fortress Oblivion from the Machine Cult costs you 3. If you played a base this turn, you may scrap a card in your hand or discard pile. And this is an outpost. Now, the defense works the same. You have to get 4 or more in order to destroy this base. But because it's an outpost, you must attack this base first before you decide to attack your opponent or any of his other normal bases. And if you've got multiple outposts out, your opponent has to rip through all of those in order to get to your other bases or your own authority points. So basically the game is just going to proceed like that. You're going to draw 5 cards, play them, try to buy more and better cards out here in the center row in order to get a better, stronger, you're going to scrap cards to make it more efficient. You're going to build up and try to have as much combat as you can to take out your opponent's bases or to take him out. The first person to take out all of their opponent's authority is the winner. Now, one other thing I want to mention is that with the Kickstarter edition of the game, there were some bonus cards that I'm not sure are going to be in the retail version. I really don't know, but I wanted to show them to you anyways. The first is that you have these 4 cards here that are different scenarios. There's 2 cards for each scenario. 1 card of each of them is for a fully cooperative mode with the other player, where you're basically fighting against the game together. The other is for a solo mode, where you're just singly trying to defeat the game. You have Pirates of the Dark Star, where you're fighting a fleet of pirates, and the Nemesis Beast, which is some giant alien creature. These other cards are Gambit cards, and you'll decide how many of these cards you want to deal out to each player at the beginning. You just decide beforehand, give each player an equal amount of them, and they stay face down. They're randomly dealt out and stay face down in front of the player, and then at any point on their turn they can choose to reveal their card and use the scrap ability on it. So Unlikely Alliance, reveal the card, scrap it, draw 2 cards. Surprise Assault, reveal it, scrap it, get 8 combats. Energy Shield, whenever you, not your base, are attacked, reduce the damage by 1, and then you get to, if you scrap it, you draw a card. So that can give you a constant effect all the time. And Rise to Power, scrap it to get 8 authority and draw a card. And there's a lot of different faction cards here. Some of them are doubles, but it's just different ways to play the game if you need to spice up the base normal game for 2 players. Anyone that knows me or is familiar with my channel knows that I love deck building games, so I should be predisposed to like Star Realms. I also, much like I mentioned in my intro, I'm one of those people that has the common complaint that deck builders don't have enough interaction. When you're playing a game like Ascension, which is a fantastic game, I love it, it can often feel like multiplayer solitaire and just point maximization. So the fact that there's a lot of interaction in Star Realms should be a very good thing for me, and it is. I like Star Realms quite a bit. I don't think it turns the genre on its head. I don't think it's going to change your mind about deck building games. And in fact, a lot of people are not going to like the interaction in this game because it can be mean. But it says that right up front. You are in this game to destroy your opponent. And that is a very refreshing thing. Like I said, even games that do have interaction, like, I mean, let's face it, even games like Dominion have some interaction between players. You can buy those curse cards or witch cards or whatever and put curses on the other players. In Ascension, you can do a lot of things to screw over your opponent's constructs that they put into play and to even take cards from their hand, things like that. But really, it's just a side effect of the main gameplay. It's not like a core aspect of those games. Even in Tanto Cuore, I really love the interaction in Tanto Cuore, but it's not that prevalent. In this game, you must win by destroying your opponent. That's it. The only reason you are deck building in this game is to make your deck stronger and to get warships in that deck that are going to just wipe out your opponent's bases and then their authority. So that is a key component of this game, and some people are not going to like that interaction. For instance, I played War Machine Hordes. War Machine Hordes High Command is another example of a deck builder that's all about combat and fighting your opponents, in that case, over territory cards. And some people in my group did not like that at all. And I imagine that if I tried to play this game with them, they would feel the same way. Those people tended to be more Euro gamers who, because of that, do not like a lot of interaction, especially combat interaction. So you need to know that going into this game. For me, because I knew that going in and because I'm not totally adverse to combat, especially with the deck building mechanic mixed in, I ended up liking it quite a bit. But let's start at the beginning. The rules for this are very simple. Like I said, the base game is just your typical standard deck builder with 2 types of currency. There are some interesting little mechanics to this, however, that I really enjoy. The first is the matching mechanic. I think this has been done by other deck builders that I haven't yet played, including Nightfall, which is actually on my shelf somewhere back here. I still need to play it. But in this case, what you're trying to do is you play these cards, and some of them will have faction symbols on them. If you've already got a card, a base in play with the same symbol, or in the same turn you've played another card that has the same faction symbol, you'll kick off special abilities on those cards. And that can lead to some interesting decision making. You may want to put a lot of bases into play of different types, just so that you know that if you buy cards with those symbols and with special faction abilities, you know you'll have a reliable chance of kicking off those abilities and getting some good combos. It could be something as simple as a card that gives you currency, but then if you have a faction, you get to draw an extra card. But that can be huge. This game is a race. You're in a race to get as much combat as possible to take out your opponent before they take you out. So it can be very, very necessary to get those faction abilities. Another interesting thing is the idea of trashing cards. Now, every deck builder has some sort of system for culling cards from your deck. It's a key aspect of deck building. Get rid of useless cards that you don't need anymore as you buy better cards in order to make your deck faster and more efficient and get to the cards that you really, really want to draw and play. This game twists that up a bit by making some cards so that you can trash them in order to get a really powerful ability together with the other abilities of the card in the same turn. What's even more important about that is not only can you do that with cards that you want to get rid of anyways, sometimes you might want to do it with a really good card because you just need that extra little oomph. It could be trashing a card to get some more much needed currency to buy a really devastating card out in the center row, especially if it keeps your opponent from having it. It could be destroying a base just to get... There's one base in particular that On its own, it's just good because it's an outpost, which prevents the other player from getting to you before they destroy it first. But if you destroy the base, if you trash it, you get like 5 combat power. In one game, that was enough to kill the other player. I mean, those are some really cool aspects. And again, it adds to that thing of you need to be paying attention to what the other player is doing because they're trying to kill you, and they will do it as soon as they can. As soon as they can get enough power in their deck, represented by the ships and by the different bases that they have. As soon as they get that, you're toast. So you need to pay attention. And sometimes you may have a ton of combat and be like, wow, I can deal, you know, maybe they don't have any outposts in play. And you can say, wow, I can deal like 15 points of damage to my opponent, or 15 points of authority to my opponent. That's awesome. But they have these bases in play that would probably cost me like 12 points of damage or combat to take out. But those bases are giving them a lot of currency every turn. They're setting off their other card special abilities, the faction abilities. What do? I learned the hard way after my first game that you need to take out those bases because you're trying to stop their engine and keep it from getting stronger. And you have to wait for the right moment and just hit them with everything you have. But while it is a race, if you rush too fast to attack your opponent, they're just going to keep their engine rolling. And then it doesn't matter how many hit points they have left. If they can, at that point, if they can build a good defense and hit you for even more damage, you've lost. So there's an interesting little interplay there between and decision making between taking out bases, taking out your opponent, worrying about your own currency, and worrying about your own engine. You do want to get those incredibly strong combat cruisers, but if at a certain point you're only going to be able to draw those so many times, you need to buy other cards, workhorse cards, and so you need to have currency in the beginning. So maybe you need to not take a card that costs 5 if it means you can get 2 of the explorers or whatever the 2 currency card is, just so you can get your engine rolling better. So I think this is a really, really solid deck builder. I am very curious. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I don't know how it plays with multiple players because there's so much combat. Like I said, I think this game would play the same, but it would just be lengthier. But that could be kind of cool. Now, this game also came with Kickstarter extras, which I mentioned in my overview, that are for cooperative or for different faction cards. I haven't played with those because I kind of like how streamlined this game is, to be honest. And I'm not even sure that the game would be that great cooperative because it promotes combat between the players so much. But I probably will try it at some point. But even as it stands, even if you get a version that doesn't have those cards, I don't know if it'll be commonly available or not. This is a solid game, and I'm eager to see what else this company comes out with, and eager to see what expansions they can come out with for this game, because I didn't think that the deck building genre had that many more surprises for me, and maybe there's anything too shocking in this little box, but there's enough there to make it worth a look if you're into deck building games. Nice artwork too. It's got a great presentation, good card quality. It's a good package. It's not going to be my favorite deck builder, but it's definitely one of my favorites at this point. So check it out. My name is Nick from Board Game Brawl, and I just totally spelled the name.